You know who Dick Rowe was, Taplines listener? Maybe? He was a British music producer who signed the Rolling Stones in 1963, but most people remember him as the guy who didn't sign the Beatles when he had a chance in 1962. He's alleged to have passed on the Liverpudlian band with a note to their manager saying, quote, "Guitar groups are on their way out," close quote. Ouch. But hey, the Rolling Stones aren't such a bad consolation prize, right? More importantly, this isn't a music history podcast, it's a beer history podcast. I say all that just to say it's not always easy to see what's coming next, even when it's sitting right in front of you. Today on Taplines, we're keeping it very United Kingdom with a return appearance from none other than Tim McKirdy, VinePair's managing editor and the host of the must-listen Cocktail College podcast, our big brother show on the VinePair podcast network. True to the Anglo Isle, from whence Tim cometh, we're talking tea today. But even truer to Tapline's American brewing history focus, it's hard tea we're talking about. Tim and I spilled some tea on this very special crossover episode, which covers how the hard seltzer boom gave way to a bust that cleared the board for Twisted Tea's decades in the making moment in the sun, and paved the runway that vodka-based Interloper and VinePair Next Wave 2025 Rising Drinks Brand of the Year finalist Surfside is currently speeding down. After watching High Noon carve into Truly's lane, why didn't Boston Beer Company corner the spirits-based hard tea market when it had the chance? Well, I mean, if Dick Rowe is any indication, I guess it just goes to show you that hindsight is 2020. It's VinePair managing editor Tim McKirdy. It's Twisted Tea versus Surfside. It's a Blurred Lines battle royale for the future of hard tea, and it's all right here, right now, on VinePair's Taplines. Don't call it a comeback, Taplines listeners, or do, I guess, because we've got our man in Manhattan, VinePair managing editor Tim McKirdy, back on Taplines for another episode. Tim, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me back.
Tim, of course, listeners, is the man with the dulcet tones behind Cocktail College on the VinePair Podcast Network. He's also the man behind so many of the reported features and other stuff we publish at VinePair, including the Hop Take column written by yours truly. Go check it out. But today we're here, Tim, we've got you on the show for a little bit of a crossover episode. I don't know if the fans have been calling out, clamoring with one voice, but I like to imagine they are demanding your return to the show for a spirits-based take on a malt-based phenomenon, I suppose. We're gonna be talking hard tea today, man. When's the last time you had yourself a hard tea?
Ooh, that is a great question.
You've trained your palate. You've saved it for this important tasting. Yeah.
You know, I personally can't say that. Maybe I've never had one. I've certainly tasted them, but iced tea, without booze, is not something I particularly enjoy myself. That's why I've sort of renounced my British citizenship, and I'm an exile over here in the US. So
that's actually why you're here, is just because you couldn't stand tea, and
I just I was done with it. So no. But I would say probably during the pandemic, I was tasting a lot of RTDs for my work at VinePair. So I want to say maybe summer 2020 is most likely the last time I had a hard tea.
Hard tea snuck in there somewhere along the way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And listener, you're most familiar with Twisted Tea, the big wall of retina-searing yellow and blue accented cans that you see in any gas station or many supermarkets these days. And Twisted Tea has been on a remarkable tear over the course of the past half decade. Remember, this is a brand that came out 23 years ago. 2001, I think, is when it first hit the shelves. So we're going to be talking about that today, but we're also going to be, talking through some of the brands that have come along and have begun to nip at the heels, so to speak, of Boston Beer Company's red hot flavored malt beverage. We'll be talking especially about some of those brands that aren't based on fermented cane or fermented malt, but are based on distilled spirit and how they have kind of changed the dimension or added dimension to what was for the last 20 years, basically a one-horse race with Twisted Tea out in front. So, Tim, we got a lot to do. I think that a good place to start, because we're in the present, which is a little bit different than we're normally used to here on Tap Lines. I know listeners expect us to fire up the time machine and go back in time. But I do think that it's worth kind of setting the stage for where hard tea is now before we go back to 2020, where you made some bold predictions that we're going to revisit in a little while. But 2024, we are recording this in mid-September, so the big selling season of summer 2024 is behind us. Beer, malt-based stuff. Traditional beer did not fare very well. Twisted Tea did very well, but we're also seeing a newcomer, an interloper to Twisted Tea's, sort of hegemonic dominance of the segment. And that's from your side of the fence, Tim. We've got a spirits-based interloper in Surfside. Tell me a little, what do you know about Surfside?
Well, it's definitely a brand that's been on our radar here for a while now at the VinePair HQ. I want to say, I believe, Philadelphia based.
That's right. Stateside distillery, out of Philly.
Stateside.
Yeah.
And I want to say as well that the folks behind that operation also do decent business with flavored liquids that are non-alcoholic. So it makes a lot of sense that they would make a lot of headway in this space. Part of the success, which I'm sure we can obviously get into soon, but we know that Philadelphians are very proud people and like to support local and like to get behind causes that are close to their city or within their city, right? So I think that certainly hasn't harmed things along the way. But yeah, definitely a very, very exciting brand, spirits brand on a tear, and just sort of, breaking records or certainly phenomenal growth that we're seeing.
Yeah, and just to put some numbers on that, listener, Surfside, which, again, comes from a relatively, I don't want to run it down, but Stateside was not a very well-known distillery outside of Pennsylvania, where it is the leading craft distillery, but it doesn't have a national brand, or it didn't, but it launches this RTD in, I want to say 2022, this canned vodka-based cocktail, Surfside, which is an iced tea in vodka, and they also make a lemonade in vodka. And it just really takes off. And so recording this with summer 2024 just a little bit in the rear view, the brand in mid-July, Beer Business Daily reported that Nielsen IQ scan data has it up somewhere around 860% in off-premise dollars year over year, trailing, in the trailing 4-week frame, which is kind of how, that market research platform, will break out some of its data. So we're talking about just phenomenal amount of growth that it's experiencing right now. The founder of the brand, the co-founder of the brand, projected to Beer Business Daily in mid-July that they're looking at probably clearing around 4.5 million cases of, by the end of 2024. So all in for the year, 4 to 4.5 million cases, which would make it bigger than Neutral, which is Anheuser-Busch's vodka seltzer, kind of like their High Noon competitor. It would also make it bigger than Cutwater, the canned cocktail brand that Anheuser-Busch acquired in 2018, 2019, I don't know exactly when, late last decade. And so to be the number 2 spirits-based canned cocktail brand in the country behind the indisputable segment leader, High Noon. So we're talking about a brand that is just going gangbusters right now. And we don't really do this type of coverage that often on Tap Lines. I do it a lot at Hop Take on VinePair.com. Again, a little plug for the column. Go check it out. But the reason I think that this is something that, we wanted to talk about today is because there's this didn't happen overnight. Surfside's success certainly, has to do with the liquid. It tastes good. I've had it before. It's too sweet for my taste, but it's solid liquid. The branding is good, but again, these aren't transformative sort of proprietary advantages. These are table stakes for any brand. But part of the reason that it's had so much success is that there's history to the way this segment has evolved. And with Twisted Tea, malt-based Twisted Tea, as the absolute, sort of juggernaut in the space, with something like 83 to 85% of overall market share, it's still very much the leader, and it really built this category, this segment as a champion, which is how sort of the industry likes to talk about those types of products that are out in front, defining the space to consumers. But it isn't the only player anymore, as Surfside's rise demonstrates. And what I want to do, Tim, if you'll indulge me, is return to a prescient, sort of gaze into the crystal ball that you made in July 2020, just over 4 years ago, looking at what was happening in the hard tea space. So to the extent that we're going to go back in time, listener, we're going back to 2020. Put yourself in the pre-vaccine days of the pandemic, get yourself in a good headspace there. You've just decided to stop washing your groceries off. You're still not sure if it's okay to meet with people outside. The vibes are bad, but working remotely, Tim McKirdy, a younger Tim McKirdy, files, I think, a pretty prescient piece looking at the summer of hard tea, brewing in the offing. Take us back, Tim. 4 years ago in 2020, you saw hard seltzer on the rise, and you saw hard tea around the corner. Why was that?
Well, it's interesting. I think at that point in time, I was doing a lot of coverage for VinePair on the developing, rapidly evolving flavored malt beverage space. I think whether it was December 2019 or January 2020, we had sort of published a fairly in-depth article on VinePair about how hard seltzer wasn't a fad, because I think so many folks in the industry at the time were trying to sort of cast it as that, so that they could just almost shoo it away and say, no, this thing's not going to take off. And if people thought it was just a summer drink. By July, or by that summer of 2020, it was very, very clear that it was a juggernaut and it was only going to keep growing. The extent to which I think we've now realized, we've arrived there.
Right.
And, you had three big brands dominating that space, and it was a very difficult period for other people to make their way. We'd seen craft offerings, but they just weren't landing as well, or nothing was going as big as a White Claw or a Truly at the time. So it felt like, all right, could you take that playbook and then adapt it to other beverages that might be rife for innovation, or that might already exist but people paid less attention to? I think Truly also kind of showed us that hard seltzer wasn't necessarily it didn't take off just because of the flavor or lack thereof, because they had introduced hard seltzer lemonade, which defied expectations, at least here in the office, and that did very well, and that was fuller flavored and also sweet, but without sugar. It was, in my opinion, a very disgusting sweetener was in that one. I think that was a bit of a miss. But so we saw that, and I think you could start looking around at what were some of the next logical, beverages. And there was at the time a slowly growing number of producers, smaller producers as well as the larger ones. But this felt like an opportunity where if you wanted to innovate, if you wanted to get in, hard seltzer was no longer a possibility. So maybe hard tea could be that opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, like, in 2020, as you say, you know, like the hard seltzer market is already starting to firm up in a way that makes it clear that it's going to be White Claw. And at that time, it still seemed like Truly was going to be a solid competitor to White Claw, though we should talk a little bit in the context of Twisted Tea and its relative lack of brand extensions, you know, some of the troubles that Truly would run into with its overextension, with Boston Beer Company's overextension of that brand. We'll get into that in a moment, but the hard seltzer, you know, market is starting to firm up, but the hard tea market is, fully dominated by Twisted Tea at this point. They're at like something like 93 share of all the hard tea being sold in the country is Twisted Tea is coming from Boston Beer Company. So this is fully, Twisted Tea segment. I want to talk about where you remember the spirits-based canned cocktail segment being, because that's where Surfside and Boston Beer Company's own answer to Surfside Sun Cruiser, and of course High Noon's iced tea version, that's where those sit if you want to situate them, in terms of base and in terms of, competitive set. They're spirits-based canned cocktails. I mean, we are seeing some stratification in the canned cocktail segment these days, but where was it in 2020? Like, we weren't obviously nearly as far along. What was the lay of the land at that point?
Yeah, so it seemed also to be a moment where a lot of people were throwing things at the wall to see what would stick.
Right.
And I think it's worth also distinguishing between, canned cocktails that meet the spirit, no pun intended, of a cocktail, and other drinks that get lumped into that category, which we might, see more as an RTD, right? A hard seltzer, a High Noon for me, I don't really see the two things as being the same, but I know for the purposes of collecting data, often they are lumped together.
Which skews, listener, by the way, which skews the data, because then you just have to pull High Noon out to get a better representation of what's actually going on in the data set, because it skews it so much. Yeah.
So within the realm of let's get High Noon out of the way. I want to say High Noon launched in 2020.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And I think we were some of the first to taste it here at VinePair, and very quietly impressed with that. And the question always at that point too was like, is it smart to launch a spirits-based seltzer, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point, or at least in some way. But in terms of cocktails that you would think of as actual cocktails, you had Cutwater leading the way by a long way, right?
Right.
In terms of the number of SKUs that it had, and also just sales and, on the side, I'm a spirits judge for the Los Angeles Spirits Awards, and, every year they submit all of their SKUs, and even though we taste a double blind, you have to kind of pretend like you don't know what's in front of you, because you know all the SKUs and you're familiar with them, right? And they make a very decent Bloody Mary. They make a questionable rum and Coke, but, it's not our place to judge these drinks here.
Yeah.
I think they're doing good stuff. But so you have Cutwater definitely leading the space.
But their value proposition, as you say, is totally different than High Noon's. Like, they're
100%.
They're putting out a cocktail in a can.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and it's full flavored. And also, they're not trying to tap in any way to the things that we were led to believe, and I'm sure were true to a large extent, made hard seltzer such an attractive proposition in the beginning, right? Calories, sugar count, carbs, all of these things. It was a way that you could sort of sneakily get your alcohol intake while still feeling good about yourself. And Cutwater was not that, right? These are full flavored drinks. Pretty alcoholic in some instances.
Too. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Some of them you definitely got to chill down a lot, or maybe even pour over ice, But then I guess the other category or the other sort of segment of canned cocktails at that time, you're seeing a lot of upstarts. You're seeing a lot of people trying to sort of react to this new reality where we didn't know how long we were going to be at home for.
Right.
A lot of the drinking occasions, as we like to call them, were taking place at home or in parks, at beaches. So this was a great opportunity. You saw a lot of brands emerge that many of them are no longer around.
Yeah.
And as I say, some of them were basically like fizzy alcohol with flavor, and others were trying to recreate sort of classic cocktails. So it was a really interesting time. There was a lot going on in that part of beverage alcohol.
Yeah. And that was when, you wrote this story for VinePair about like looking ahead from hard seltzer and linking the hard seltzer boom to a hard tea boom. And to your point, like a lot of the brand, and this is just the nature of the business that we're in, but like even some of the brands that you covered just 4 years ago in this article, I don't think are still around. And right. Like it's always like one of those things I like go back and like read some of, my coverage and I'm like, man, like this one's out of business. This one got bought. This one got, went bankrupt or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, sorry. Like hope it wasn't my fault. But yeah, I mean, like there was kind of some interest in moving into like, from different players, including some Anheuser-Busch backed brands moving into like the hard tea space because Twisted Tea, again, as I was saying, had it all to itself at that point. It was like 94% of all the hard tea being sold. Mm-hmm. But fast forward to back to the present day here. And we know that, as we said, like many of those brands haven't actually been able to carve off too much of what business types would refer to as hard tea's long tail, right? Like this idea that, Twisted Tea is out front, but there's this opportunity to pick up 2, 3, 5, 11 share of the market, by trailing them. We haven't seen a lot of that work on the malt-based side of things. I mean, you've got Arizona's like spiked Arnold Palmer line does all right. I think that might be number 2. We've seen New Belgium move in with hard charged tea. Monster Brewing Company, the energy drinks like spin-off arm, has Nasty Beast Nasty. What is it? It's called like Nasty Tea or something. It's not
Nasty.
It should be called Nasty Beast, and it's not called that. And it's very irritating to me. I know it's just like free money that they missed out on. But so you're seeing some players with like you have spiked. You have Peace Tea, which is Red Tree, Coca-Cola's tea brand that they've spiked. Lipton did a spiked one with Fifco, I want to say. So you've seen a lot of big players try to crowd into the space and try to carve off some. Oh, how could I forget Tilray brands doing their fucking like Shock Top Lit, LIIT. A name, listener, which by the way doesn't make any sense until you realize that they just jacked Blue Point, the Long Island brewery that Anheuser-Busch owned. They just jacked a SKU that it had called Long Island Iced Tea and just turned it into a Shock Top brand. But obviously Long Island Iced Tea doesn't really make sense for Shock Top because it's not based in Long Island like Blue Point is. So they just started calling it Lit and like never fucking explained that to anyone. I found that out and I was delighted by that detail. But like you've seen some of these firms move into the space, but you really, I mean, and they're taking some share, of course, a little bit here and there, and Twisted Tea share has come down. But it's incremental, right? Like no one is toppling Twisted Tea as the malt-based or the cane-based or whatever it is, the fermented, leader in the hard tea segment. And the reason that I think it's worthwhile to talk about sort of how Twisted Tea got there is to talk about, what's coming next in this segment or in this flavor profile or however you want to talk about it. Because 4 years ago, you correctly saw that there would be a rush into this segment and that it might sort of supersede the seltzer segment, the hard seltzer segment that was then, really charging. You were right about that. And I think now the question is, where will hard tea go from there? And that brings us back to Surfside, the vodka based alternative to Twisted Tea. And it also just brings us back to these questions of what the dialogue is between spirits based RTDs, not really cocktails, right? But RTDs, and their sort of malt based counterparts. And for that, I think it's worth unpacking a little bit how you see the spirits based canned cocktail / RTD space evolving or having evolved in the last 4 years. I mean, you teased it a little bit before, but like that segment has stratified. Like you don't really compare, you don't see High Noon on the same footing as Cutwater. Those are not competitors in the same competitive set, at least, right? Like even though they may take some occasions from each other on the margins. How has the spirits-based RTD / cane cocktail segment kind of emerged since you wrote that story?
Yeah, so I think it's also worth pointing out some of the things that I got very wrong, or some conclusions that a lot of people, myself included, were drawing at the time based upon the success of hard seltzer.
Look
right?
at how humble you are. My God, you disgust me.
I got to put my hand up here, right? And maybe it was true, but maybe we gave them too much importance, right? So we said, a lot of us believed that hard seltzer succeeded so well because of that nutritional value, those numbers, right? And when I wrote the article, I was saying that, like, I mentioned that Twisted Tea and the Arnold Palmer Spiked, like, they had gained full market share almost between the two of them, right, in the hard tea segment, despite the fact that they didn't lean into any of those things. I think they had like 10 to 20 times more sugar than hard seltzer, which is insane. So, and again, at that time, we were saying, here's this opportunity. You can do the hard seltzer playbook, and you can do it with this, this new full flavored category, right? Hard tea. Great. There's an opportunity for you. The other thing that I think we didn't get right at the time, or we didn't pay enough importance to, was we thought folks just simply didn't care about the base of the base alcohol, right? We said, look, no one cares what hard seltzer is made of. They enjoy drinking it. They don't care what a flavored malt, whether it's malt based or cane based or all this stuff, right?
Right.
If it has 5% alcohol and you can't taste it and you can just taste the natural flavorings, bam, you're good to do. You're good to go. And I don't think High Noon really took off very fast either. I think it was a slow burn and then a massive rise, sort of exponential growth. You're probably looking at more. I would need to see the numbers on that, but that's how it feels anecdotally, right? So, yeah. So at the time, or to get here, we've seen a lot more brands try and get in on that with their RTDs, right? Tequila brands launching tequila and sodas.
Yep.
High Noon expanding into using other alcohols for their base, i.e. tequila.
Yep.
And again, it feels like a category that is becoming very saturated. And then on the other hand, in those other types of canned or spirits-based drinks, we have seen the emergence of some very high quality ones, including Tip Top and Post Meridian, that are making real cocktails, your old fashions, your Manhattans, and, single serve. They're pretty expensive, actually, each one, and they're high alcohol. But, these are drinks that you're not drinking it from the can, but you're saying, I will have a single serve cocktail that's, I would argue, bartender quality.
Yeah. Pour over ice or pour into a glass.
Pour over
type of
ice,
thing.
or even shake with ice and serve it up in a coupe. But those are very much like the outliers. I don't see too many brands doing that these days on the spirit side or beyond. I think what's interesting as well, and this is just an aside, we saw this a lot in the malt space, but I see it also too in the spirit space. Your margaritas are coming in tasting like a margarita, but oftentimes they are effervescent, they're sparkling, and they're much lower in alcohol than a traditional margarita. So you're getting this kind of this cocktail seltzer hybrid that's certainly full flavored, but is neither a traditional margarita or maybe a more classic like seltzer product. So that's where things have really sort of evolved. But for most intents and purposes, I would like to say the spirits-based category is probably, your high noons, your Cutwaters, your Surfsides now, and then everything else is probably a small segment of it, right? It's generally those are it, and quote unquote real cocktails, apart from Cutwater, really are probably a marketing error, or a roundup.
A rounding,
A rounding error, sorry.
Error. Yeah, no, totally. And like the idea that like proper cocktails can succeed at spirits-based cocktails can succeed at scale sort of runs into some tough operational realities with regards to where they can be sold, right? I mean, like half the, I wouldn't know the number off the top of my head, but like spirits-based stuff has a tenth as many, maybe a quarter as many doors nationally as malt-based beer products or things like that, dude. That's part of the reason why, listener, if you ever go into a gas station and you see the little nip bottles of Fireball and you're like, well, wait a second, that's whiskey. Not the stuff you're looking at. That's malt-based stuff that they just made with the assumption that anyone who's willing to buy Fireball in a gas station doesn't give a shit.
Go figure.
Which, I mean, it turns out they were right. Their Sazerac, which owns Fireball, was I don't know if they still are, but for a while was a top 50 beer brand, quote unquote, because of how much of that malt-based Fireball they wrote. So, your point is well made and well taken about like this idea that people didn't care about the base. I don't think you were totally wrong about that at the time. I think like when hard seltzer was really booming, I didn't see any evidence. I don't remember seeing any evidence at the time that people were investigating hard seltzer, based on, what it was made with, right? And like doing comparison shopping to see, oh, this one's fermented from agave and this one is fermented from, cane. And I would rather have, the one that's fermented from malt, whatever. I even remember some craft brewers at the time, God bless them, kind of like making the argument that like, oh, people will want our hard seltzer because like we make it with real ingredients. And it's like, oh, buddy, like I don't think that's what's going on here. So I don't think you were totally wrong at the time, although as it would shake out, White Claw, which is still a dominant player and is kind of the dominant player in the segment, in the hard seltzer segment, White Claw really paved the way for High Noon, because as High Noon started to, sort of gain more awareness in the marketplace, I think it kind of created the demand for something with a different base than White Claw. I remember, I'm thinking back to The Atlantic published an article in 2019 that was like declaring 2019 the summer of hard seltzer. And then the next year, the writer, Amanda Mull, who I know a little bit, we got to get her on the pod. Amanda, come on the pod.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs. Yeah, that's right. Go Dogs and come on Tap Lines. But Amanda, the next year, I think, or maybe 2 years later, wrote another article being like, hard seltzer is over and it's all because people want like the real spirit in it and people perceive it as cleaner and as maybe better for you, quote unquote. This idea that kind of like a clear spirit is going to give you less of a hangover, has less calories. I mean, these are not things that are true, listener, but they're things that like do affect people's purchasing decision. We would see the trade from hard seltzers. We saw it in the data. Watching people trade over and up a little bit because High Noons are typically more expensive. From hard seltzer over to High Noon. So like that trade was happening. And I think that parallels a little bit what happens or is happening right now with Twisted Tea creating a longer runway because it had been around since 2001. It was talk about a slow burn. I looked it up. High Noon hit in 2019, but I'm not sure it was national at that point. So they start coming on strong like 2020. We talk about that as a little bit of a slow burn. Twisted Tea was a real fucking slow burn. It was around since 2001, and it did well. Like, it was selling, but it was never the main story for Boston Beer Company because Boston Beer Company had Sam Adams that they wanted to push. Then through a lot of the aughts, had through a lot of this past decade had Angry Orchard that they were pushing really hard. They, acquired Dogfish Head in 2019. So it was never really like the thing that Boston Beer Company wanted to push. It was kind of this thing that was always cooking in the background, right? Like it's posting respectable numbers without any real strong marketing behind it and not a lot of attention. It's kind of the redheaded stepchild of the portfolio. But as Sam Adams declines and as Truly craps out, which, really, I think maybe that's a little strong, but like Truly, this is part of the story here, right? Is that Boston Beer Company is a legitimate number 2 competitor to White Claw towards the end of last decade, and then they turn the innovation machine on to 11 and just start cranking out every line extension under the sun on Truly. You mentioned margaritas. They make malt-based margaritas. They make lemonade. I think they actually made an iced tea, a Truly iced tea at one point.
Yeah.
They've got all these like holiday packs. It would turn out to be an enormous, like a category error, basically. They over innovated, is how they would, I think they later described, like what happened to their investors, because there was a huge crash in the Truly sales. And still, they really haven't recovered. I mean, as we record this in September 2024, I just read an interview or an item on Brewbound the other day with Jim Cook saying, Truly really hasn't stabilized, as quickly or as much as he would have thought it would have by now. Like that brand is really damaged during this period. And with all this attention that Boston Beer puts on sort of like Truly and repositioning it, and they do a brand refresh and whatever, Twisted Tea emerges as sort of like the only brand that's like going well at Boston Beer Company during this period, but they don't have a spirits-based sort of next step there. And we come now to, 2023, 2024, Surfside, I think, hits in 2022. So you see sort of the way this parallel is shaping up, or at least I hope you do. White Claw sort of paves the way for High Noon to really take off. Twisted Tea seems like it is paving the way for a spirits-based hard tea to take off. It does not look, at least at this stage, like that spirits-based hard tea is going to be a Boston Beer Company product, which is kind of nuts considering how much of a head start they had in the space. There's no question in any of this, Tim. So let me give you a question here so you can respond instead of just having me talk at you. Talk a little bit about what sort of went on or what is going on in like the canned cocktail RTD space today that creates a better value proposition for something like Surfside than it might have been even 3, 4, 5 years ago. Like that runway to me that Twisted Tea paved seems significant, but it also seems like, the Surfsides of the world have more entree into more direct competition with a malt beverage product like Twisted Tea than ever before. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And can I also just say, the Truly story for me rivals my all-time Truly, quote unquote, we over-innovated.
Yeah. I forget. They said something along those lines. I would have to go pull the exact quote, but it was like, because it's a publicly traded company. They have to get on every quarter and kind of tell analysts what's going on. And the analysts have almost as much data, maybe more data than they do. So there's nowhere to hide on those calls, really. Yeah, they're like, we went a bit too hard on this.
Yeah, so Boston over-innovating with Truly is up there, as I said, with my favorite stories in this sort of segment of alcohol in this time period, as Anheuser-Busch just killing spiked seltzer, which would ultimately become Bon and Viv.
That's right.
They literally owned the segment. At the time, as many people were calling it spiked seltzer as hard seltzer.
Yes.
And wild. So that's an aside. But before we move on from Truly briefly, and talking about over innovation. So this was either something that legitimately happened to me this week or it was a fever dream.
Hell yeah. Either definitely happened or definitely didn't. And you be the judge, listener.
I walked into my local liquor store. So, we talk about that opportunity for, especially here in New York, right? Malt can be in supermarkets. You have your liquor stores for the hard stuff. And underneath the counter in a glass case, this was certainly not an upscale liquor store.
Only the finest.
They had a quart bottle. I want to say it was bright neon purple or pink. It looked like an RTD cocktail. It was Truly. I don't know what it was. I've since looked on the website. I can't find it anywhere. So this maybe is a relic. This is a dusty from that summer of over innovation.
Wow.
Truly, I got to go back there and buy it and just be like, what is this thing?
So do you think? So you think that the hypothesis here, if this wasn't like a peyote vision, don't do drugs, kids. I mean, of course, we're all joking about this. We're all over 21. But if this wasn't sort of a fever dream, as you say, the hypothesis is that at some point during that churn of enormous output of SKUs under the Truly brand name, they put out a quart item. You don't know what flavor it is, obviously. You're not sure. Any of this
neon flavor, so who knows? I mean, this might have been around the time they were working a lot with Dua Lipa. I don't think she's returning their calls anymore.
That's right. I forgot about that. That's right.
Yeah, man. High times for Truly. They had this massive billboard downtown. And I want to say it was like around Broadway and Canal or somewhere here in New York. This massive one, Dua Lipa, and I was like, things can't get any better. They couldn't.
They had enough money to hire not one Lipa, but multiple Lipas. Yeah, they were. Thank you for laughing at my terrible joke.
Yes, I enjoyed it very much. I like a dad joke.
Okay, so from this backdrop, this fever dream may or may not have been true. But you're on the hook to comment about the runway that Twisted Tea created and what happens to brands that create that runway when the next thing comes along, which often happens to be spirits based these days.
Yeah. So obviously, look, they have proven there is a massive market for this product. It's funny actually, when I was reporting that piece about hard tea back in 2020, there's a quote that I wish I had included and I didn't, because I think about it quite a lot, from the founder of one of the brands. I think it was Loverboy.
Yes, which is still around, by the way.
That is still around.
It's Kyle from Summer House for all the Bravo Celebrity fans out there.
The universe.
Yeah, that's right.
He was talking to me, and I think I was trying to make the piece as well focus less on the sort of twisted teas, which that should have been the focus, and more on like, what does the hard seltzer version of hard tea look like? And he was talking about how basically twisted tea is this like however many million a year juggernaut that like Boston Beer Co. has forgotten exists, or would like us, all folks who look at data, to forget that it exists so that no one tries to like follow in their footsteps. They're such a massive brand. They own so much of the market. You can argue like they might think, well, we're only going to be stealing share from ourselves if we put out a spirits version, right? Like, is there a net win? And then also, if you're saying made with vodka, now you're turning attention to the thing that other people might not have thought about, which is, well, what is the original stuff made with, right? You're highlighting the fact that it's not. So to your point, and in your wonderful column about this, you make many good, you question many things like, why didn't Twisted Tea sort of read the writing on the wall and say, we've already seen this happen with High Noon. But at the same time, you can say, well, maybe there's some legitimate reasons they didn't, and that was just left there for someone to come and capitalize on that. And Surfside has certainly done so very successfully. So I can sort of see both sides of it, even though clearly, like you said, they proved there was this massive opportunity there. and they didn't take themselves up on it.
Yeah, they got, someone ate their lunch. And obviously now, and whether it's a scramble to kind of cover their ass or there's a legitimate value proposition that they feel strong, it doesn't really matter because Boston Beer Company limped into the spirits-based hard tea segment after Surfside with its release of Sun Cruiser, which, they claim it was around before Surfside launched. I'm not sure that makes them look better because it makes them look like they had it, I think they're like, oh yeah, we were on this a while ago. And it's like, but that's bad actually.
Yeah.
That means you guys totally missed the boat. I don't know, but they limp in with Sun Cruiser. This is actually a good, and we will close not on hard tea, but on maybe the thing that prevented Boston Beer Company from going whole hog on the spirits-based sort of descendant of Twisted Tea when it had the opportunity to before Surfside came along, which is Bevy, which is the long drink product that Boston Beer Company launched. Finland has this popular drink, listener, for those of you who are not aware, that is gin-based, and it's, effervescent, and it kind of drinks a little bit like a hard seltzer, a little sweet for my taste, but there was a lot of momentum behind this as kind of the next hot fourth category drink to come to the U.S., and there are two brands that take a real run at it. One is called Finnish Long Drink. That's the one you're probably familiar with because it's still around. It is made with gin, and it's fine. I've had it before. I think a lot of people like it. It's selling very well. And the other was Bevy, which is Boston Beer Company's version of it that was malt based. So the entire sort of value proposition in Finland for this thing is it's gin based. It's got these different flavors but the idea is that it's a spirits based cocktail, and Boston Beer Company made it with a malt or a cane base or whatever, in order to get it more places all at once. The product was this enormous flop. It was a disaster. This is a softball question for you, Tim, but in your expert opinion, is it a good idea to make a famous cocktail, famously spirits based? Is it a good idea to make that not with spirit or what?
Well, I mean, like I said, there's malt-based margaritas and stuff out there, and I don't know to what extent they sell, but they're certainly palatable, and I can drink one, especially on a hot day. I'll pluck one from the fridge here in the Vine Pair office. But the Finnish long drink, I mean, that's a great another example to lump into that category we had before of the genuine contenders or what the RTD canned cocktail market actually looks like. That is a brand that has succeeded, I would say, against the odds. I mean, this came along, it had no name recognition, right? No one knew what a long drink was here. Yep. So the fact that they owned the name in the category didn't really matter because you're still, and also you're trying to convince Americans to drink something which can be something of a polarizing spirit, right? Juniper is not a flavor that people are born enjoying.
Right.
So, but I mean, they definitely picked the wrong horse. Yes, you're right that it is a softball. And also I should say as well, just thinking about it, when I said about it making sense for Twisted Tea maybe not to, I was talking about maybe not do a spirits-based extension.
Yeah, right.
But certainly, the open goal was there for Boston Beer Co. to take all of that learning. That is 100% true. So they went with Bevy. Is Bevy still around?
No,
and
they folded immediately,
They folded immediately. We were talking before as well. I know we have somewhat moved on from hard tea, but
bring it back.
Do you remember if around that time there were so many different flavors for Twisted Tea, or was it pretty much one thing? Is Boston doing its thing again?
No, so that's actually a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up because we definitely should talk about that briefly. With Twisted Tea, they are not doing what they did with Truly, which I think pretty demonstrably at least contributed to Truly's struggles, if not completely caused them. The overextension of Truly into a bunch of different flavors, a bunch of sort of different mix pack sizes and seasonal offerings and whatever is not something that we've seen Boston do really much at all with Twisted Tea. there seems to be a real wariness, maybe learned caution from like the damage that, Truly sustained. There seems to be a real reticence at Boston Beer Company to extend that brand beyond, a real core offering. I believe they have a peach and maybe a couple others, but these are like, sort of basic flavor extensions, not like new products, not new, like a margarita style thing, nothing like that. And I think that my guess is that that's pretty deliberate. I mean, when you read the transcripts of their earnings calls, which I do when I'm, reporting on that brand or any brand with Boston Beer Company, a lot of what they talk about with their analysts is how disciplined they're being with the Twisted Tea brand. Now, I think a lot of that is like triage to preempt analysts from asking yet another question about like, how are you going to make sure you don't fuck up Twisted Tea like you fucked up Truly? But I think, you see it in their innovation pipeline. There's just not nearly the flurry of new product releases under the Twisted Tea brand as there was under the Truly brand. So I think like, whether or not that's cause and effect is something only Boston Beer Company could say. We're not doing this because of, what happened with Truly. But regardless, the outcome is the same, which is that there just really isn't that type of, deluge of lookalike products that confuse customers on the shelf all under the Twisted Tea name, the way there was with Truly. And I think that's, again, played to its advantage. And to your point earlier, like, does that also inform maybe why they didn't launch a spirits-based version? Because they're nervous about cannibalizing the slow and quiet and pop, and long-standing success of Twisted Tea? Sure, maybe. I mean, that's plausible. It would certainly track with what we know about the evolution of the two brands, Truly and Twisted Tea, and the divergent paths they took within Boston Beer's portfolio. So I think that's a good place to leave it, my friend. Thank you, as always, for joining us on Tap Lines. There's a little treat. We're blurring lines here on the beer podcast because we have our man, our cocktail insider. Folks, if you haven't checked it out, I don't know what you're up to. I listen to Cocktail College. It's a fantastic podcast. Tim pours his heart, his soul, and maybe a little bit of the Ginfinity bottle from his apartment into every episode. But it's really tremendous, and please go check it out. And you might even hear me over there someday soon when we have our next crossover episode. But until then, Tim, thank you for joining Tap Lines.
Thank you very much, Dave. And just remember, the bigger they are,
the harder the tea. Tap Lines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mellon, editor-in-chief Joanna Sciarrino, managing editor Tim McKirdy, and art director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Tap Lines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes, you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.